The ghost Liam had mourned for 10 long years was suddenly alive before his eyes, yet she looked at him with the hollow gaze of a stranger. The love of his life, the mother of his children, had returned, but her memories of him were gone, erased like pages torn from a book. This is a story of heartbreak, resilience, and the fragile hope of second chances. Tap like, subscribe for more stories that heal the heart, and share in the comments where you're watching from today. The alley was a narrow throat of brick and decay, choked with the smell of wet garbage and forgotten things. Under the stuttering light of a single bare bulb, two brutish shapes cornered a smaller figure, a woman whose defiant posture was beginning to crumble under their menacing advance. Liam didn't shout a warning. There was no time for posturing. 10 years of raising 2 children alone, of fighting silent battles against grief and poverty, had stripped him of all but a core of hardened resolve. He moved with a speed that surprised even himself, a blur of motion fueled by a father's protective rage. The first man turned, a sneer on his face that vanished into a gasp as Liam's fist connected with his jaw. The crack of bone was a sharp, ugly sound in the tight space. The second lunged, brandishing a glinting knife, but Liam was already moving, sidestepping the clumsy thrust and using the man's own momentum to slam him into the unforgiving brick wall. The man crumpled to the ground, a groaning heap. The fight was over as quickly as it began. It was not the elegant choreography of a trained fighter, but the desperate, efficient violence of a man with everything and nothing to lose. He stood breathing heavily, the adrenaline a bitter fire in his veins, and turned his attention to the woman. She was still on the ground, huddled against the wall, her face obscured by the deep shadows. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. He extended a hand, calloused and steady, a silent offering of safety in the urban wilderness. She looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and gratitude. She took his hand, her own trembling slightly, as he helped her to her feet. She was brushing herself off, murmuring a thank you, when she stepped forward, out of the oppressive shadows and into the stark, unforgiving light of the street lamp at the alley's edge. And in that moment, Liam's world did not just stop, it fractured, shattering into a million sharp-edged pieces of an impossible past. It was her face. It was Alara's face. The same high cheekbones, the same gentle curve of her lips, the same constellation of freckles across the bridge of her nose that he had traced with his fingertips 1,000 times. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, were the eyes he saw every morning in his daughter's reflection. Time ceased to exist. The sounds of the city, the distant wail of a siren, the hiss of tires on wet pavement, all of it dissolved into a deafening silence. There was only this face, a ghost made of flesh and bone, a miracle wrapped in a nightmare. His breath caught in his throat, a painful, ragged thing. The ground seemed to fall away from beneath his feet, leaving him suspended in a dizzying void of disbelief and a hope so terrifying it felt like agony. He had rehearsed this moment in a million dreams, but in those dreams she smiled, she knew him, she came home. This woman just looked at him with a polite, vacant confusion, a stranger wearing his wife's face. His mind screamed, a silent, desperate roar against the absurdity of the moment. It couldn't be. It was a trick of the light, a cruel projection of his own unending grief. He was a man haunted for a decade, seeing her in crowds, hearing her voice on the wind. This was just the most vivid, most painful hallucination yet. But she was so real, the rain beating on the fabric of her coat, the slight tremor in her hand as she pulled her collar tighter around her neck. He had to know. He had to hear his own sanity shatter against the truth. Ilara? The name was a ghost on his lips, a broken whisper he hadn't spoken aloud to anyone but his children in 10 years. It felt foreign, sacred, and profoundly foolish. The woman's brow furrowed in polite confusion. The name meant nothing to her. She offered a small, hesitant smile, the kind one gives to a well-meaning but mistaken stranger. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice a melody that struck the deepest chords of his memory. "I think you have me confused with someone else. My name is Helena." The name was an insult, a wrong note in a perfect song. Helena. It was clinical, cold, a name without history, without the warmth of a shared life. The chasm between them was absolute. He saw the love of his life, and she saw a disheveled man in an alley who had just saved her from a mugging, nothing more. The hope that had flared in his chest just moments before was extinguished, leaving behind an icy, desolate cold. Just as Liam was struggling to form another word to bridge the impossible gulf between them, the sleek, predatory nose of a black luxury sedan sliced through the rain and pulled up to the curb. The door opened with a silent, expensive hiss, and a man emerged. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Liam made in 6 months. His name was Alistair Vance, and he radiated an aura of power and ownership. The kind of man who didn't just walk through the world, but expected it to rearrange itself for his convenience. He strode over to Helena, his movements sharp and proprietary, his arm instantly circling her waist to pull her against him. "Helena, darling, are you hurt?" he asked, his voice a low, possessive rumble. He barely glanced at Liam, his eyes sweeping over him with a dismissive air, cataloging the worn jacket, the frayed cuffs, and filing him away as an inconsequential piece of the scenery. "Thank you for your assistance," Alistair said, the words clipped and sterile. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a thick wallet. He extracted several large bills and tried to press them into Liam's hand. "For your trouble, it wasn't a reward. It was a transaction, a dismissal, a way to scrub the grime of the encounter from his polished life." Liam's hand remained clenched at his side. He wasn't looking at the money. He was looking at the way Alistair held her, the way his hand rested on the small of her back. It was a place his own hand knew intimately, a place he had held and cherished. Seeing another man, this man, touch her with such casual ownership was a blade twisting in a wound he didn't even know he had. Liam stumbled away from the curb, Alistair's money lying on the wet pavement like a wilted leaf. He didn't remember the walk home. It was a blur of distorted streetlights and the rhythmic, hollow slap of his own feet on the concrete. His small third-floor apartment, usually a sanctuary of warmth and predictability, felt alien and strange, as if he were seeing it for the first time. The familiar scent of laundry soap and the faint aroma of the spaghetti his son had made for dinner did nothing to ground him. He was a ghost in his own life. He moved silently through the living room, past the sofa with its lumpy, worn cushions and the bookshelf crammed with well-loved paperbacks. He pushed open the door to his children's room. Leo and Lily, his 12-year-old twins, were asleep, their chests rising and falling in the soft, steady rhythm of childhood innocence. Lily was curled on her side, her dark hair fanned out across the pillow, a mirror of her mother's. Leo was sprawled on his back, one arm flung over his head, his face in sleep a perfect, masculine echo of Ilara's features. For 10 years, they had been his living, breathing connection to her. He saw her in their smiles, in their stubbornness, in the way they both hummed off-key when they were concentrating. Tonight, looking at them was an exquisite form of torture. They were the proof, the living, undeniable proof that the woman in the alley was not a ghost. The grief he had so carefully managed, the grief he had packed down into a dense, manageable stone in his chest, erupted. But it wasn't the familiar ache of loss. It was something new, a volatile, chaotic mixture of impossible hope, blinding rage, and profound, soul-crushing confusion. His wife was alive, and she was a stranger. 10 years ago, the world had been a simpler, brighter place. Liam and Alara's life wasn't measured in square footage or bank balances, but in shared laughter that echoed in their tiny, sun-drenched apartment. He was a carpenter then, his hands creating beauty from raw wood, and she was an artist, her canvases bursting with colors that seemed to defy the city's grayness. They were two halves of a whole, their love a quiet, steady flame that warmed every corner of their existence. He remembered the afternoon she told him she was pregnant. She'd met him at the door, her eyes shining with a light so bright it seemed to eclipse the sun. She hadn't said a word, just took his hand, calloused and dusty with sawdust, and placed it on her still flat stomach. In that silent, sacred moment, their future had unfolded before them, a tapestry of PTA meetings, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. They dreamed of a small house with a yard, a dog, and the simple, profound joy of watching their children grow. They were blissfully unaware of the cruel twist of fate waiting just around the corner, a darkness gathering on the horizon of their perfect, sunlit world. Their love was a fortress, they believed, impenetrable and eternal. They didn't know that some storms don't just rage against the walls, they find a way to tear down the very foundation, leaving nothing but rubble and the ghosts of what might have been. That memory, once a source of comfort, was now a torment, a stark reminder of the life that had been stolen from them, a life he now realized might not have ended, but had simply been rerouted down a dark and twisted path. The next morning, the apartment was filled with an unfamiliar tension. The usual breakfast routine, a comfortable dance of sleepy movements and mumbled conversations, was stilted and strange. Liam was a specter at his own kitchen table, staring into a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Leo and Lily, ever perceptive, exchanged worried glances. They were used to their father's quiet moods, the somber anniversaries that would cast a shadow over him for a day or two. But this was different. This was a deeper, more unsettling silence. He wasn't just sad, he was absent, lost in a labyrinth of thoughts they couldn't begin to navigate. Lily, always the more direct of the two, slid off her chair and padded over to him. She placed her small hand on his arm, a gesture of profound, unchildlike empathy. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice a small, clear bell in the heavy silence. "Are you sad about Mommy again?" The question, so simple and innocent, struck him with the force of a physical blow. How could he possibly answer? How could he explain that the reason for his sadness had fundamentally, cataclysmically changed? He could no longer say, "Yes, sweetie, I miss her." The truth was a complex, monstrous thing. Your mother is alive, but she doesn't know we exist. He looked down at his daughter's face, her eyes the exact shade of Alara's, and felt a wave of protective fury. This was their story, their family that had been stolen and rewritten by a stranger. He couldn't give them an answer. Not yet. He just pulled her into a tight hug, burying his face in her hair, the familiar scent of her shampoo, a small, solid anchor in the swirling chaos of his new reality. He couldn't go to work. The thought of pushing a broom down sterile hallways, of emptying trash cans filled with the debris of other people's lives, was impossible. His own life had just been turned into a landfill of unanswered questions, and he had to start digging. After dropping the twins at school, their worried faces a fresh spur to his resolve, he went to the public library. The place was a haven of quiet concentration, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside him. He sat down at a public computer, the keyboard cool and impersonal beneath his trembling fingers. He typed the name she had given him, Helena Croft. The search results flooded the screen. There she was. Not a ghost, not a hallucination, but a public figure. Dozens of photos showed her at charity events, gallery openings, always on the arm of the same cold, powerful man from the alley. Alistair Vance, the formidable CEO of Vance Industries, a global conglomerate with its fingers in everything from construction to tech. Liam's heart hammered as he read the articles. They painted a picture of a fairy tale romance, the reclusive socialite and the billionaire tycoon. And then he found it. An older article, a Society column piece from nearly 9 years ago, detailing Helena's first public appearance with Vance. It mentioned her mysterious past, her recovery from a tragic accident that had left her with profound amnesia. The timeline was a perfect, sickening fit. The accident, the amnesia, the new life. It was all there, a carefully constructed fiction built upon the ruins of his world. He wasn't just grieving a dead wife anymore. He was facing an enemy who had stolen her, erased her, and presented her to the world as his own creation. The penthouse where Helena lived was a testament to Alistair Vance's philosophy on life, control masquerading as perfection. It was a vast, minimalist space of glass, chrome, and white marble, offering breathtaking, panoramic views of a city that felt 1,000,000 miles away. It was less a home and more a gallery, and she was the most prized piece in his collection. After the attack, Alistair was suffocatingly attentive. He insisted it was a random, tragic consequence of living in a dangerous world, a world from which he, and only he, could protect her. He hired more security, vetted her appointments, and gently discouraged her from walking in the park she loved. Every gesture was framed as an act of love, but it felt like the bars of a gilded cage being slowly, methodically reinforced. Helena, or the woman who was called Helena, felt a growing disquiet. Her life was a series of beautiful, empty moments. She had everything a person could want, but she felt nothing. Her mind was a blank canvas, her past a story told to her by Alistair. Yet, lately, there were flickers, strange, intrusive sensations. The scent of pine and sawdust on a man's jacket made her feel an inexplicable pang of longing. The memory of a melody she couldn't place, a simple, sweet lullaby that brought tears to her eyes for no reason she could name. A phantom feeling, like the gentle pressure of small hands against her belly, a ghost of a life she couldn't remember living. These fragments were her only real possessions, and she clung to them, even as Alistair gently, firmly, told her they were just echoes of trauma, tricks of a healing mind that were best left ignored. The memory of that final day was a raw, open wound that had never properly healed. It had started with a stupid argument, the kind of trivial disagreement that loving couples have and forget an hour later. It was about money, a bill they couldn't quite cover. Harsh words were exchanged, born of stress, not anger. He remembered the wounded look in Ilara's eyes, a look that had haunted him for 10 years. "I just need some air," she had said, her voice tight. She'd grabbed her keys and left. Liam, stubborn and proud, had let her go, assuming she'd drive around the block and come back, and they would apologize and everything would be fine again. But she didn't come back. The hours stretched into an eternity of stomach-churning dread. Then came the knock on the door, the 2 police officers with grim, sympathetic faces. A car matching her description had gone off a winding country road, down a steep ravine. There was a fire, they said, The wreckage was catastrophic. They had found personal effects, her purse, her driver's license. Weeks later, they confirmed a match using dental records from a partially recovered jawbone. It was conclusive, they said. Irrefutable. His world had ended, and buried beneath the mountain of his grief was the crushing, unbearable weight of guilt. If only he hadn't argued with her. If only he had stopped her from leaving. His last words to his wife had been laced with frustration, not love. For a decade, he had carried that guilt like a shroud, believing his foolish pride had sent her to her death. Now, that guilt was transmuting into something else, a cold, hard certainty that the story of that day was a deliberate, monstrous lie. He couldn't live in this limbo. He had to see her again, not in the chaos of an alley, but in her own world. He had to look into her eyes and find some flicker, some trace of the woman he knew. The charity gala he'd read about was in 2 days, hosted at a lavish downtown hotel. It was a fortress of wealth and exclusivity, a world away from his own. Getting inside seemed impossible, a fool's errand. But looking at the worn photograph of Ilara he kept on his nightstand, her smile beaming with a life he refused to believe was truly erased, he knew he had to try. He wasn't the man he was 10 years ago. He was a father who had learned to be resourceful, to make ends meet on a shoestring budget, to fight for his children in a world that wasn't always kind. This was just another fight, the most important one of his life. He would find a way in. He would walk into the lion's den, not with a roar, but with the quiet, unyielding strength of a man who had already lost everything and had just been given a terrifying, miraculous reason to get it all back. The plan was reckless, desperate, and utterly necessary. He would become a ghost, a shadow in the background of her gilded life, and he would wait for a single moment to see if he could bring her back from the dead. The day of the gala, Liam's small apartment was transformed into a staging ground for his impossible mission. He took out the suit he had bought from a second-hand store, the fabric smelling faintly of mothballs and another man's history. It was a deep charcoal gray, a bit tight in the shoulders, a testament to a decade of physical labor. He laid it carefully on his bed, a somber uniform for the battle ahead. He spent an hour with an iron, pressing out the creases with a concentration he usually reserved for fixing a leaky faucet or helping with complex math homework. Every movement was deliberate, infused with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He looked at his hands, the calluses on his palms, the network of small scars on his knuckles. These were the hands of a worker, a provider, a father. They were not the hands of a man who belonged in a ballroom sipping champagne. As he carefully buttoned the crisp white shirt, he caught his reflection in the small, cracked mirror on his dresser. He saw the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the graying at his temples. But beneath the weariness, there was a new light, a spark of defiance. He wasn't just Liam the janitor anymore. He was Liam, the husband, a man on a mission to reclaim his stolen past. This suit was his armor, a fragile disguise that would allow him to cross enemy lines. Infiltration was easier than he expected. Large events were always short-staffed. A catering company, desperate for last-minute help, hired him for the night with few questions asked. Dressed in the standard-issue black trousers, white shirt, and black waistcoat, he was granted access to the glittering world of Alistair Vance. He became one of dozens of anonymous figures, weaving through the opulent ballroom with trays of canapes and champagne, his face a mask of polite neutrality. He was invisible, and his invisibility was his greatest asset. It gave him the freedom to observe, to search. The ballroom was a sea of jewels and silk, of forced laughter and calculated smiles. It was a world of breathtaking beauty and profound emptiness. And then he saw her. Across the room, standing beside Alistair, She was a vision in a deep emerald gown that shimmered under the crystal chandeliers. She was the most beautiful woman in the room, and the saddest. She smiled when spoken to, nodded at the appropriate times, but her eyes were distant, lost. She was a perfectly crafted doll, going through the motions of a life that wasn't her own. Watching her, a fierce, protective ache bloomed in Liam's chest. That was his Alara, trapped inside a stranger named Helena. He gripped his tray of empty glasses, his knuckles white, and began to move slowly, deliberately, through the crowd, a shadow making his way towards the light. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs as he approached her. His plan was simple, clumsy, but it was all he had. As he passed the small circle where she stood with Alistair and another couple, he feigned a stumble, his body lurching forward just enough to jostle his tray. A glass of water tipped, splashing down the arm of her expensive gown. Gasps rippled through the group. Alistair's face tightened with annoyance. Liam was immediately on his knee, dabbing at her dress with a napkin, his head bowed, murmuring a cascade of apologies. "I am so sorry, ma'am, so clumsy of me. Please forgive me." He was just another fumbling waiter, an object of momentary irritation. But then he looked up, allowing his eyes to meet hers for just a fraction of a second. The ballroom, the people, the noise, it all faded away. There was only her. "I'm so sorry," he said again, but this time the words were not for the spilled water. They were for the 10 lost years, for the stolen memories, for the children she didn't know. They were a raw, desperate plea from the deepest part of his soul, a message he prayed she would somehow, on some forgotten, cellular level, understand. He was begging her to see him, to truly see him, not as a waiter, but as the man who held the missing pieces of her life. For a fleeting, immeasurable instant, as his eyes locked with hers, something shifted in Helena's placid demeanor. It wasn't recognition, not a conscious memory breaking through the fog. It was something more primal, a jolt deep within her, a feeling of profound and unsettling familiarity. The man's eyes, they weren't just apologetic. They were filled with a raw, fathomless sorrow that seemed to speak directly to the unnamed emptiness inside her. It was as if she were looking into a mirror that reflected not her face, but her own lost soul. The feeling was so intense that it made her dizzy. She swayed slightly, her hand going to her temple. The moment was shattered by Alistair's sharp, impatient voice. "That's enough. Get out of here," he snapped at Liam, waving him away like an irritating fly. He turned his full, solicitous attention back to Helena. "Darling, are you all right? Let's get you cleaned up." He led her away, his grip on her arm just a little too tight. From across the room, Liam watched them go, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. He had failed. But as Helena was led away, she glanced back over her shoulder, her brow furrowed, her eyes searching the crowd for the clumsy waiter. The seed of doubt, the first tiny crack in the foundation of her false reality, had been planted. She wouldn't be able to name the feeling, but she would not forget his eyes. Returning to his silent apartment late that night, the smell of cheap soap and old wood, a comfort after the sterile opulence of the gala, Liam felt a profound sense of defeat. The brief connection he thought he'd felt with Helena now seemed like wishful thinking, a projection of his own desperate hope. He sank onto the edge of his bed, the second-hand suit feeling like a foolish costume. The door creaked open, and Lily padded in, her small form silhouetted by the hallway light. She climbed onto the bed beside him without a word, sensing his despair. "You were gone a long time, Daddy," she whispered, her voice thick with sleep. He nodded, unable to speak. He reached for the old, framed photo on his nightstand, the one of him and Elara on their wedding day, their faces alight with a future they thought was guaranteed. Lily leaned against him, looking at the picture. "She looks like the angel in my dream," she said, her voice soft and certain. "The one who sings to me sometimes." Liam froze. An angel who sings. The innocent, simple words of a child cut through his despair with the clarity of a ringing bell. It wasn't just about his loss anymore. It was about their loss, too. His children had a mother they didn't know, a mother who was alive and breathing in the same city. Lily's dream, her simple, profound faith, was a sign. He couldn't give up. His fight wasn't just to reclaim a wife. It was to restore a mother to her children. The memory surfaced with a startling, painful clarity. Elara, heavily pregnant with the twins, was sitting in the rocking chair he had built for her. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, creating a halo around her dark hair. She was humming, a soft, simple melody he had never heard before. "What's that song?" He had asked, coming to kneel beside her. She smiled, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "It's theirs," she had said. "I don't know where it came from. It just appeared. It's their lullaby." She had sung it to them every night through the last months of her pregnancy, her voice a low, soothing promise to the two small lives growing within her. After she was gone, he had continued the tradition, humming the same lullaby to his two crying infants in the dead of night, the melody a fragile thread connecting them to the mother they would never know. The tune was uniquely theirs, a secret language of their family, composed in love and sanctified by loss. Lily said an angel sang to her in her dreams. It had to be this song. It was a key, he realized. A key that had been forged in their shared past. A key that might, just might, be able to unlock the prison of her mind. It was more than a memory. It was a piece of her soul that Alistair could never have known about, and therefore could never have erased. Alistair Vance was a man who did not tolerate loose ends. The incident at the gala, insignificant as it seemed, had unsettled him. It was the waiter. He had seen the way Helena looked back at him. It was a crack in the perfect facade he had spent a decade constructing. His paranoia, always simmering beneath his polished exterior, began to boil. He started questioning Helena, his inquiries couched in concern. "You seemed rattled after that clumsy waiter spilled his drink. Did he say something to you?" She would reply with a confused "no," but the question itself planted a seed of suspicion in her own mind. Alistair increased his surveillance, not just on Helena, but on his own life. He had the catering company's employee list for the night of the gala pulled. He scanned the names, the meaningless identities of the city's invisible workforce, and then he saw it. Liam Miller. A common enough name, but Alistair was not a man who believed in coincidences. He ordered a background check. The report came back within hours, and as he read it, the blood drained from his face. Liam Miller, a widower. His wife, Elara Miller, deceased 10 years ago in a fiery car crash. A photo was attached. It was the face of the man from the alley, the face of the waiter, the face of the man whose life he had stolen. The powerful figure's mask of cool control began to crumble, revealing the terrified, obsessive man beneath. The past was not dead. It was standing at his door, and it had a name. Liam knew a direct confrontation was impossible. Alistair was too powerful, too well protected. He couldn't get close to Helena again without Alistair intervening. He had to find another way, a back door into her lost memories. He started digging, not into Helena Croft, the socialite, but into Elara Miller, the woman who had vanished. He spent hours at the library, scrolling through microfiche of old newspapers, searching for anything related to the accident. He focused on Alistair Vance, cross-referencing his company's activities with the date of the crash. His heart leaped when he found it. A small article detailing a controversial land development project by Vance Industries, located just 5 miles from the ravine where Alara's car was found. It was a connection, a tangible link between Alistair and the site of her death. He kept digging, driven by a cold, relentless fury. He expanded his search to hospital admissions in the weeks following the crash, looking for any unidentified women admitted with head trauma. And there it was, buried in the digital archives of a regional paper. A short human interest story about Jane Doe, found wandering on a highway miles from the crash site, suffering from severe amnesia. She had been taken to a private, long-term care facility, a hospital known for its wealthy clientele and, as a quick search revealed, a hospital that had received a multi-million-dollar donation from Alistair Vance just 1 month after the accident. The pieces were no longer just fitting together. They were forming a horrifying, undeniable picture of a crime far more monstrous than he could have ever imagined. The cracks in Helena's consciousness were widening. The world, once a simple two-dimensional story given to her by Alistair, was beginning to take on a strange and unsettling depth. The flashes were becoming more frequent, more vivid. One afternoon, while walking past a construction site, the sharp, clean scent of freshly cut pine wood filled the air, and she was hit with a wave of emotion so powerful it buckled her knees. It was a feeling of love, of safety, of home. She saw a brief, fleeting image of strong, calloused hands expertly guiding a piece of wood through a saw. Another time, at a sterile coffee shop, the bitter aroma of a cheap, dark roast coffee made her think of laughter, of mornings spent in a sunlit kitchen that was not her own. She started to have dreams, fragmented and confusing, of 2 small, warm bodies nestled against her, of tiny fingers gripping hers. She would wake up with a profound sense of loss, an ache in her arms for something she couldn't name. She tried to talk to Alistair about it, to explain the strange haunting that was taking over her mind. But he was always dismissive, his explanations clinical and detached. "It's post-traumatic stress, darling," he would say, his voice smooth and reassuring. "Your mind is creating false memories to fill the void. It's best not to dwell on them." He was trying to soothe her, but his words had the opposite effect. They made her feel like a prisoner in her own mind, a mind he seemed determined to keep locked. Liam knew he was running out of time. Alistair was aware of him now. He could feel it. He had to take another risk, another direct approach, but this time he would be more careful. He learned Helena's routine. He knew she visited a specific high-end bookstore every Tuesday afternoon, her one small act of rebellion against Alistair's tightening control. He waited for her outside, his heart a frantic bird in his chest. When she emerged, her face serene and lost in the world of the book she had just purchased, he stepped into her path. He wasn't dressed as a waiter this time, just a man on the street. "Excuse me," he said, his voice quiet but firm, stopping her in her tracks. She looked up, and for a moment he saw the flicker of recognition again. The man with the sad eyes. "I know this is strange," he continued, speaking quickly before she could walk away. Before her security, a discreet man in a dark suit across the street could intervene. "But you remind me so much of someone I lost. It's uncanny." He held her gaze, pouring a decade of loss and longing into his eyes. "She loved sunflowers," he said. The word simple, a non-threatening detail, but it was a test, a key. Sunflowers were not just Ilara's favorite flower. They were her obsession. Their tiny apartment had been a shrine to them. If any part of Ilara was still in there, the word would resonate. He then turned and walked away, melting back into the crowd, leaving the word hanging in the air between them like a single potent seed. The word echoed in Helena's mind all the way back to the penthouse. Sunflowers. It seemed so random, yet it resonated with a strange, deep familiarity. The next day, a floral delivery arrived, a weekly standing order from Alistair of elegant, blood-red roses. As the florist's assistant was arranging them in a large crystal vase, Helena saw a bucket of cheerful, boisterous sunflowers left by the door, part of another order. On pure instinct, she walked over to them. She touched a petal, its texture rough and familiar. She buried her face in the massive flower head, and the earthy, sun-drenched scent transported her. She felt a phantom warmth on her skin, a memory of standing in a vast, golden field under a brilliant blue sky. It was a feeling of pure, unadulterated joy. "Get those out of here!" Alistair's voice, sharp and cold, cut through her reverie. He had entered the room, his face a mask of thunderous disapproval. "They're garish. I can't stand them." His reaction was bizarrely extreme, a level of anger completely disproportionate to the presence of a few flowers. He ordered the assistant to remove them immediately. As the sunflowers were carried out, Helena watched them go, and for the first time, she wasn't just confused by Alistair's behavior. She was suspicious. It wasn't that he disliked the flowers. It felt like he was afraid of them, and afraid of what they might make her remember. Liam's desperation was a constant, burning fire. His direct approaches were too risky, the seeds he planted too subtle. He needed something undeniable, a force of nature that Alistair couldn't guard against. He needed her children. The decision was agonizing. He had protected Leo and Lily from the harsh realities of the world their entire lives, sheltering them within the small, safe bubble of their family. To use them, to expose them to this confusing and potentially dangerous situation, went against every fiber of his being. But then he looked at their faces, half her, half him, and he knew he had no choice. They were the living truth. They were the proof that her life, as Helena Croft, was a lie. He didn't plan a confrontation. He wouldn't subject them to that. His plan was simpler, relying on fate, and a mother's instinct, he prayed, was not entirely erased. He found out from a society blog that Helena, despite Alistair's wishes, still took a short, guarded walk through a specific, quiet corner of Central Park every Thursday morning. He would take the twins to that same park. They would just be there, playing, living, breathing. He would let the universe and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her children do the rest. It was the biggest gamble of his life, and he was staking his entire family's future on it. The air in the park was crisp and cool. Liam sat on a bench, pretending to read a book, but his eyes were fixed on the path, his nerves stretched to the breaking point. Leo and Lily were a short distance away, kicking a soccer ball back and forth on a patch of grass, their laughter a stark contrast to the tension coiling in his gut. They were a perfect portrait of innocent, carefree childhood. Then he saw her. Helena was walking slowly down the path, her ever-present security guard a discreet 20 paces behind. She looked ethereal and out of place, a pale flower in the vibrant green of the park. Liam held his breath. As she drew nearer, Leo, in a burst of youthful exuberance, kicked the ball too hard. It went skittering across the path, rolling to a stop directly at Helena's feet. It was a perfect, unscripted accident. Leo, chasing after it, didn't look where he was going, and tripped, tumbling onto the gravel path with a cry of pain. Lily rushed to his side immediately, her face a mask of concern. "It's okay, Leo. It's just a scrape," she said, her voice calm and soothing, an old soul in a young body. Helena, who had stopped for the ball, watched the small domestic drama unfold, and as she watched, An expression Liam had never seen on her face appeared. It was an intense, overwhelming wave of emotion, a deep, inexplicable pull towards these two children she had never met, an ache in her chest so profound it felt like a physical wound. She felt compelled to move, an instinct she couldn't rationalize or ignore. She walked over to the children, her security guard tensing behind her. "Are you all right, little one?" she asked Leo, her voice softer and warmer than Liam had heard it before. Leo looked up at her, his eyes wide and tear-filled. Lily stood protectively beside him, looking up at Helena with a curious, searching gaze. Helena knelt down, instinctively reaching out to brush a stray leaf from Leo's hair. And as she looked into their faces, into two pairs of eyes that were the exact same stormy sea green as her own, the world tilted on its axis. It was more than a passing resemblance. It was like looking at a reflection of herself, split and refracted into the faces of a boy and a girl. She felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, a feeling not of meeting someone new, but of remembering something ancient and essential. She felt like she should know them. She felt, with a certainty that defied all logic, that she belonged to them. From his bench, Liam watched, his heart lodged in his throat. He could see the confusion, the dawning awareness, the battle playing out on her face. This was it, the unbreakable biological truth, a bond so deep that even a decade of lies and amnesia could not fully sever it. 10 years ago, Alistair Vance had been a man consumed by obsession. He had met Ilara at a gallery showing months before she met Liam. He was captivated by her spirit, her talent, her utter indifference to his wealth and power. She had politely but firmly rebuffed his advances, choosing the humble carpenter over the billionaire CEO. The rejection was a wound to his immense pride, an insult he could not forget. On the day of the crash, he had been visiting his new development site nearby. He saw the plume of smoke rising from the ravine. Driven by a morbid curiosity, he had his driver stop. He made his way down the treacherous slope and found the burning car. And a short distance away, thrown clear from the wreckage, was Ilara. She was alive, but barely, her body bruised, her mind shattered by the trauma. She was disoriented, mumbling, unable to remember her own name. In that moment, a monstrous, opportunistic plan formed in his mind. This was his second chance, a chance to have the one thing he could not buy. He carried her back to his car, and as they drove away, he made a call. He paid a corrupt medical examiner to falsify dental records. He paid a local official to close the case. He secreted her away to a private clinic, and when she woke, with no memory of her past, he was there. He was her savior, her protector. He gave her a new name, Helena, and a new life, a life where she would belong only to him. He hadn't rescued her from the crash. He had meticulously, cruelly kidnapped her from her own life. The park incident shattered Helena's fragile peace. The faces of those children haunted her, their eyes staring out at her from her own reflection. She began to ask Alistair questions he couldn't answer. Why are there no pictures of me from before the accident? Who were my parents? Did I have friends? Her inquiries became more persistent, her melancholy deepening into a quiet, determined suspicion. Alistair, feeling his meticulously crafted world begin to collapse, felt his control slipping. He knew, with a sickening certainty, who those children belonged to. He made the connection. The man from the alley, the waiter at the gala, the father of the children in the park. It was him, Liam Miller, the carpenter, the husband, the ghost who had come back to reclaim what was his. Alistair's fear, the fear of losing her, of being exposed, began to curdle into a dangerous, desperate rage. He was no longer just a liar protecting his secret. He was a cornered animal. He had built his entire world around this beautiful, stolen woman, and he would not let some ghost from the past tear it all down. His obsession, once a quiet, possessive thing, was now morphing into something far more menacing. The threat, when it came, was not subtle. Liam was walking home from the grocery store a few days later when a dark car slid to a stop beside him. A large, stone-faced man in a suit got out. It was Helena's security guard from the park. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He crowded Liam against a brick wall, his physical presence an overwhelming promise of violence. "Mr. Vance knows who you are," the man said, his voice a low, gravelly monotone. "He knows what you're trying to do. He wants you to understand something very clearly." He leaned in closer, his breath smelling of stale coffee. "You have 2 beautiful children, Mr. Miller. It would be a tragedy if anything were to happen to them. Stay away from Miss Breath. Croft, this is your only warning." The man then stepped back, straightened his tie, and got back into the car, which sped away, leaving Liam with his back against the cold bricks, his heart pounding with a terror that was colder and sharper than anything he had ever felt before. The line had been crossed. This was no longer just about reclaiming his wife. Alistair had made it about his children. He had threatened the only thing Liam had left in the world, and in doing so, he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The fear was a shard of ice in his gut, but it was quickly consumed by a white-hot, clarifying rage. The quiet, grieving man was gone. In his place was a father, a protector, whose only purpose now was to bring down the man who had threatened his family. All thoughts of a gentle, slow reawakening for Elara vanished. This was a rescue mission, and time was running out. He had one weapon left, one piece of their shared soul that Alistair could never touch: the lullaby. It was the key, the undeniable proof, the one thing that could cut through the lies and the amnesia and reach the real Elara buried within. He had to get it to her. He went home, and with trembling hands, he pulled out his old, battered smartphone. He found the voice recorder app, and, in the quiet of his bedroom, he began to hum. He poured every ounce of his love, his grief, his desperation into that simple melody. He hummed the song that he had hummed to his unborn children through their mother's belly, the song he had used to soothe them as newborns, the song that was the sacred, secret anthem of their family. He saved the recording, a small digital file containing the entire history of their love. Now, he just had to find a way to get this message past the dragon guarding the castle. Liam knew he couldn't breach Alistair's fortress on his own. He needed an ally, someone on the inside. He spent 2 days watching the monolithic skyscraper that housed Vance Industries and Alistair's penthouse. He observed the rhythms of the building, the comings and goings of its staff. He noticed a young woman who worked on the late-night cleaning crew. He saw her every evening, her face etched with a wariness that he recognized in himself. He saw the way she flinched when one of the security guards spoke harshly to her, the way she kept her head down, trying to be invisible. He recognized a fellow traveler in the world of the unseen. One evening, he approached her as she left the building. He told her a carefully edited version of the story. Not the whole unbelievable truth, but enough. He told her of a woman being held against her will, of a powerful man who was controlling her. He spoke of his children. He showed her a picture of Elara, of his family, before it was broken. The young woman, whose name was Maria, listened, her eyes full of a cautious empathy. She had seen Alistair's cruelty firsthand, had witnessed Helena's profound sadness in the brief, silent moments they shared in the hallways. She looked from the photo of the smiling, vibrant Ilara to the haunted, hollow woman she saw in the penthouse. She hesitated for only a moment, then she nodded. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. The plan was terrifyingly simple, its success hinging on 1,000 things that could go wrong. The next evening, Maria met Liam in a coffee shop a block away from the Vance building. He gave her his old phone, the lullaby a silent, waiting bomb within it. He explained that Helena had a private study, a small sanctuary filled with art books, where she often went to be alone, especially late at night, when Alistair was working in his home office. Maria's job was to bypass the internal security, a risk that could cost her her job and more, and place the phone on the desk in that study where Helena was sure to find it. As Maria took the phone, her hand was steady, her expression resolute. "He shouldn't be allowed to own a person," she said, her voice quiet but fierce. "Everyone deserves to have a life that is their own." Liam could only nod, his throat tight with gratitude. He was placing the fate of his family in the hands of a stranger, an invisible worker who had chosen to see, to act, to do the right thing in a world of powerful men who did wrong. He could only go home and wait, praying that this small act of courage would be enough to start an avalanche. Helena retreated to her study that night, seeking refuge from the oppressive silence of the penthouse and Alistair's increasingly watchful eyes. The room was her only haven, a space that felt marginally her own. As she sat down at her large mahogany desk, her gaze fell upon a small, unfamiliar object. A scuffed, older model smartphone. It certainly wasn't hers, and it was far too old and common to be Alistair's. Curious, she picked it up. The screen was unlocked, showing a single audio file. Hesitantly, she pressed play. A melody filled the silent room. It was just a simple tune, hummed by a man's voice, slightly off-key, but full of a raw, unmistakable emotion. And it was the most familiar sound she had ever heard. The lullaby, the song from her dreams, the melody that had haunted the edges of her consciousness for years. It was a key turning a lock deep within her mind. The walls of her amnesia did not just crack. They crumbled. They disintegrated. They were washed away in a tidal wave of memory. Images, sounds, feelings, a decade of a lost life flooded her. Liam's smile, the smell of sawdust, the weight of a baby in her arms, then, too, the overwhelming, all-encompassing love, the names of her children, Leo and Lily, the feeling of their small hands in hers, the car crash, the terror, the pain, and then Alistair's face, leaning over her, telling her everything would be all right, the lies, all of it. The life he had given her was a prison. The man she thought was her savior was her jailer. She wasn't Helena, she was Ilara, and she had to get back to her children. The truth was a fire, burning away a decade of fog and confusion, leaving behind a core of pure, incandescent rage. Every solicitous touch from Alistair, every word of love, was now revealed as an act of profound violation. She looked around the opulent penthouse, a cage she had mistaken for a home, and felt nothing but revulsion. She had to escape. She remembered the cleaning woman, Maria, the one with the kind, sad eyes. She had a feeling, an instinct, that this woman was connected to the phone, to the truth. Using the burner phone Liam had given Maria, she sent a simple text. "I know. Help me." Within minutes, Maria had devised a plan. During the late-night shift change, when security was lax, Maria would hide Ilara in a large, rolling laundry hamper used to transport linens. It was a humiliating, desperate escape, a socialite smuggled out of her own home like dirty laundry. But Ilara didn't hesitate. She shed the expensive clothes of Helena Croft, putting on a simple cleaner's uniform Maria had brought for her. She was shedding a false identity, becoming herself again. As she huddled in the darkness of the hamper, the smell of industrial bleach sharp in her nostrils, she wasn't afraid. She was a mother going home, and nothing and no one was going to stand in her way. The address was etched into her memory, a beacon she had been unconsciously navigating towards for 10 years. It was a humble, worn-down building in a neighborhood Alistair would have sneered at. But to Elara, it was home. She walked up the 3 flights of stairs, her heart threatening to beat its way out of her chest. Every step was a step back in time, a reclamation of her own life. She stood before the door, apartment 3B, the paint chipped and faded. She raised a trembling hand and knocked. Seconds later, the door swung open, and there he was, Liam. Older, grayer, with lines of grief and worry carved around his eyes that hadn't been there before. But it was him. His eyes, the same kind, steady eyes that had first captured her heart, widened in shock, then filled with a flood of emotion too powerful to name. They just stood there for a long moment, the silence of a lost decade stretching between them. No words were needed. In his eyes, she saw her own story, her own loss, reflected back at her. It was a reunion not of 2 people, but of 2 souls who had been violently torn apart and had finally, miraculously, found their way back to each other. Liam, she whispered, her own name feeling strange and new on her tongue. I remember. The sound of her voice woke the children. Leo and Lily appeared in the hallway, rubbing sleep from their eyes, drawn by the raw emotion radiating into the apartment. They stopped short, staring at the woman standing in the doorway. They knew her face from photographs, from the stories their father had told them. She was a myth, a bedtime story, the angel from Lily's dreams. Mommy? Lily's voice was a tiny, hopeful whisper, a question she had been asking the universe her entire life. That single word broke the dam of Elara's composure. The last time she had seen them, they were tiny, helpless infants. Now they were on the cusp of adolescence, their faces a beautiful, heartbreaking mixture of her own and Liam's. She sank to her knees, her arms outstretched, tears she had been unable to shed for 10 years streaming down her face. Yes, baby, she choked out. It's me. It's Mommy. They rushed into her arms, 2 small, warm bodies clinging to her as if they were afraid she might disappear again. She buried her face in their hair, breathing in the scent of them, the scent of her children, her babies. The broken pieces of their family were finally, messily, being put back together. The gaping wound at the center of their lives was, at last, beginning the slow, painful process of healing. The rest of the night was a torrent of words, a desperate attempt to bridge the 10-year chasm that had been carved through the center of their lives. They sat around the small kitchen table, the first time the 4 of them had ever done so, and they talked. Liam spoke of his bone-deep grief, of the guilt that had been his constant companion, of the struggle to raise 2 children on his own while keeping her memory alive. Elara, in turn, described the hollow, gilded cage of her life as Helena, the feeling of being a ghost, the confusing flashes of a life she couldn't grasp. The twins listened, their eyes wide, trying to comprehend the impossible story of their own family. They had 1,000 questions, simple and profound. "Did you miss us?" Leo asked, his voice small. "More than you will ever know," Elara answered, her hand stroking his hair. "Even when I didn't know who I was missing." The small, humble apartment, once a place defined by loss, was now overflowing with a chaotic, painful, and beautiful reunion. The warmth was not just from the old radiator hissing in the corner. It was the heat of a family reforging its bonds. the light of a love that had refused, against all odds, to be extinguished. In the cold, sterile penthouse across town, a false life was ending. Here, in this small, cluttered room, a real one was beginning again. Alistair Vance did not handle loss well. When he discovered Helena was gone, his initial reaction was not sorrow, but a deep, narcissistic rage. She was his creation, his possession. Her departure was not an act of free will. It was a theft. He had curated her existence, controlled her every move, and she had dared to defy him. His fury was swift and absolute. He knew, with a certainty born of his own obsessive jealousy, where she would have gone. He didn't bother calling the police or his security team. This was a personal matter. This was about reclaiming what was his. He drove himself, his powerful car tearing through the rain-slicked city streets, his knuckles white on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. The polished veneer of the sophisticated CEO had been stripped away, revealing the raw, primal obsession beneath. He was a king whose most prized jewel had been stolen by a peasant, and he was on his way to burn the peasant's village to the ground. He was not going to reason with her. He was not going to beg. He was going to take her back, to remind her of the life of comfort and luxury he had given her, and to erase the man who was a ghost from a past he had worked so hard to bury. The pounding on the door was so violent, it seemed to shake the entire apartment. It wasn't a knock. It was an assault. Liam knew who it was before he even looked through the peephole. He saw Alistair's face, contorted with a furious, possessive rage. Liam's first instinct was to shield his family, to hide them away, but then he felt Elara's hand on his arm, firm and steady. Her eyes were not filled with fear, but with a cold, hard resolve. This was her battle, too. Liam opened the door but stood his ground, blocking the entryway with his body. He was no longer the intimidated janitor. He was a husband and a father, the guardian of his home, and he would not be moved. "You need to leave," Liam said, his voice low and steady, a quiet rock against which Alistair's rage would break. "She's not Helena," Alistair snarled, trying to push past him. "Her name is Elara. She's my wife." The confrontation was not one of physical strength, but of fundamental truths. Alistair, with all his money and power, was trying to enforce a lie. Liam, with nothing but his family behind him, was defending the truth. The humble underdog stood in the doorway of his small apartment, an unbreakable wall against the powerful man who had tried to ruin him. "Get out of his way, Liam." Elara's voice cut through the tension. She stepped forward, moving to stand beside her husband, her face pale but resolute. She looked at Alistair, not as the timid, confused Helena he had molded, but as Elara Miller, a woman who had found herself again. Her eyes held none of her former affection or dependency. They were filled with a chilling clarity. "You don't get to give orders here, Alistair," she said, her voice shaking slightly, but gaining strength with every word. "This is my home. This is my family." Alistair's face fell, his rage momentarily replaced by a stunned disbelief. He was losing her. He was losing control. "Helena, darling, you're confused," he stammered, reaching for her. "This man is a nobody. I gave you everything." Elara flinched away from his touch as if from a hot iron. "You gave me nothing," she retorted, her voice rising. "You took. You stole 10 years of my life. You stole a mother from her children. You didn't save me from that crash, Alistair. You were just a more patient kind of predator. You let the fire do its work, and then you pick over the scraps. You didn't save me. You stole me." Every word was a judgment, a verdict on his decade of lies, and he had no defense against the truth. From behind the protective wall of his parents, Leo stepped forward just a few inches, his small face set with a courage that mirrored his father's. He looked directly at the powerful, crumbling man in the doorway, the man who had tried to take his mother away for a second time. In a clear, unwavering voice that cut through all the adult rage and pain, he spoke a simple, devastating truth. "You can't have our mommy," he said. It wasn't an accusation or a plea. It was a statement of fact, as solid and immovable as the ground beneath their feet. The words, spoken with the absolute moral certainty that only a child can possess, were the final blow. They bypassed all of Alistair's defenses, his rationalizations, his justifications, and struck him directly in the pathetic, lonely core of his being. He wasn't a powerful CEO or a romantic figure. He was just a man who had tried to steal a child's mother. The purity of the statement, the simple, profound truth of it, broke him completely. The armor of his pride and power shattered, leaving him exposed and utterly defeated. The fight went out of Alistair all at once. His shoulders slumped, his face crumpled, and the powerful figure who had terrorized their lives seemed to shrink in the doorway. The rage was gone, replaced by a vast, empty despair. He sagged against the doorframe, his expensive suit looking like a costume on a broken mannequin. "I loved you," he whispered, the words directed at Ilara, but meant for himself, a last, pathetic attempt to justify his monstrous actions. "I would have given you anything." And then it all came pouring out, a torrent of confession, the obsession that had festered for years, the coincidence of being near the crash, the decision to steal her life, to build a new one for her, one where she would finally be his. He confessed to paying off the officials, to creating the false identity, to meticulously erasing every trace of Ilara Miller. He laid his sins bare on the welcome mat of the family he had tried to destroy. The powerful man was gone, brought down not by an equal force, but by the quiet, unyielding strength of a family's love and the simple, undeniable truth spoken by a child. The flashing lights of the police cars painted the grimy brick walls of the apartment building in strobing blues and reds. Alistair Vance, a man accustomed to giving orders, was led away in handcuffs, his head bowed, the picture of a fallen tyrant. Maria, the cleaner, had bravely come forward, providing a statement about her role in the escape and her observations of Alistair's controlling behavior. Combined with Alistair's own blubbering confession, the case against him was airtight. The legal system, a world of power and influence where Alistair had always been a king, would now become his judge and his jailer. As the cars pulled away, taking the architect of their pain out of their lives forever, a profound, exhausted, quiet settled over Liam, Ilara, and the children. Justice was being served, but the wheels of the law could not mend the wounds of the past 10 years. The fight was over, but the long, arduous journey of healing was just beginning. They stood in the doorway of their small apartment, a fractured family silhouetted against the flashing lights, finally free, but facing a future as uncertain and daunting as the past had been cruel. The weeks that followed were a delicate, complicated dance of rediscovery. The family was a puzzle with a piece that had been missing for so long, they had forgotten its shape. Now, with the piece returned, they had to figure out how they all fit together again. Ilara had to learn the two near strangers who shared her eyes. She had to learn about Leo's passion for astronomy and Lily's talent for drawing, about their favorite foods and their secret fears. She was a mother, learning her children from scratch. Liam had to learn to share his life again, to make room for the woman he had mourned and mythologized for a decade. The ghost on the pedestal had to become a real person again, with her own thoughts and habits. And the children, who had grown up in the quiet, stable world of a single parent, had to adjust to the presence of this new, loving, but unfamiliar woman. There were moments of frustration and misunderstanding, days filled with a quiet sadness for all the lost time. But threaded through it all was an overwhelming sense of gratitude and a quiet, tenacious love. They were not just rebuilding a family, they were building a new one, on the foundations of the old, scarred but stronger than ever before. A month later, on a crisp, sunlit autumn day, the four of them drove out to a small, quiet cemetery. They walked hand in hand to a simple headstone that read, Elara Miller, beloved wife and mother. For 10 years, this had been a place of pilgrimage for Liam and the children, a place to leave flowers and speak to a ghost. Today, they stood before it not as mourners, but as survivors. Elara reached out and traced the letters of her own name, a surreal, final act of closure. She was not the woman buried under this stone. She was the woman standing beside it, alive and breathing. They didn't speak. They just stood together, the four of them, a silent, united front against the past. They left a single bright sunflower at the base of the stone, not as an offering to the dead, but as a promise to the living. As they walked away, they did not look back. They were leaving the ghost of Elara Miller behind, along with all the pain and loss she represented. They were walking forward, together, into the bright, uncertain, but shared light of their future. The story of a family is not written in stone, but in the small, everyday moments of shared existence. Across the city, a vast penthouse sat empty, its white marble floors and chrome fixtures reflecting a cold, sterile light. It was a monument to a hollow love, a beautiful prison now devoid of its prisoner. Its silence was the sound of a lie finally ending. Miles away, a small, cluttered apartment was filled with the sounds of life. The sound of a mother helping her son with his homework, the sound of a father and daughter laughing in the kitchen, the sound of a family arguing over what to watch on television. Its noise was the sound of a truth beginning again. The story of Liam and Elara was not a fairy tale. It was a testament to the idea that true wealth is not measured in stock portfolios or square footage, but in the fierce, unyielding bonds of love. It is a reminder that true power is not the ability to control another person's life, but the quiet strength it takes to heal a broken one. Some prisons have walls of steel, and some have walls of lies, but the most powerful key is always, and has always been, the truth. Months melted into a year. The scars remained, faint white lines on the tapestry of their new life, but they were no longer open wounds. We see them now, not in a sterile penthouse or a dark alley, but in the golden light of a late afternoon in the park. Liam is pushing Lily on a swing, her laughter a bright, joyful sound that echoes through the trees. Leo and Elara are sitting on a bench, their heads bent together over a sketch pad, as she shows him how to draw the constellations he so loves to study. He looks up at her, a smile of pure, unadulterated happiness on his face, and for a moment, he is not the boy who lost his mother, but simply a boy with his mother. Liam watches them, a quiet, profound contentment settling over him. They were not perfect, they were not unscarred, but they were whole. They were a family that had been to the edge of oblivion and back, a family that had been broken and remade, stronger in the broken places. Their love story was not one of blissful beginnings, but of a courageous, hard-won second chance. The final tone of their story is not one of drama or tension, but of a deep, abiding, and overwhelming hope.